This is why I want a Mr. T like emblem or face or whatever, because
I knew exactly where you're going.
yeah.
Yeah, okay. You guys can see me. And the question is, can YouTube see me? Looks like YouTube can see me. So before I've got the live stream up, so I'm going to have people starting to join on the live stream. But before I head over to that, I want to make a challenge. I call it the John Jay Challenge. Now, my guess is you guys have both probably read the Constitution, right? Yeah.
A few times, but not recently.
Not recently. My challenge is in the next 7 days, read the Constitution. Find something in there that's unique. Find something in there that's different that you hadn't noticed before. And then figure out how you can use that and figure out how that impacts your life today. Right? Think of how many people have known something's wrong with mask mandates, with vaccine mandates. But they didn't know, oh, by the way, yeah, Fifth Amendment, due process clause, liberty, property. You hadn't thought about that, had you? But I'm saying have you thought about the fact that it's the Fifth Amendment that actually protects that your right to not have to wear a mask? Right.
I think of HIPAA.
Yep. But then HIPAA is unconstitutional as well. So there's a whole other question. So my challenge, usually I have more people here. It's a fairly small crowd. But my challenge is they can't see you. They can only see and hear me. I was gonna try and do it two-way, but it got to be a little too complicated. So I'm playing monkey in the middle. I'm between them. But I challenge you, and if you read the Constitution and look for something that you hadn't thought of before, say, oh, I never thought of that. Now I have stuff up here, and for my live folks, I'm just wrapping up a thing here in Grand Forks, North Dakota. But I want to tell you, I want to go back to that. I'll be getting to your questions in just a minute. If you're on YouTube, you can put in comments in the YouTube. I'll see them pop up. I will get to them. I have someone else who's got another live stream going. He's pirating me onto Facebook. Facebook won't let me on, so he's going to put me on Facebook probably just to honk Zuckerberg off. But between that and the people that are here, but between these two and the people here, we should have some interesting questions. But before I go, I want to go back to that John Jay quote, because this is the point. Read and study the Constitution. Teach your rising generation be free. I wrote this book called How to Read the Constitution in 30 Days, because most people don't believe me you can read it in 30 minutes. I'm always asked, well, I was going to read the Constitution, but so I did this specifically for those people that have a reason, that are trying to come up with reasons why. That's a day's worth of reading, right? 2 pages. I timed it. I'm actually recording an audiobook version of it for those who can't even bother to read, who want to just listen. None of these are more than 2.5 minutes for me to record it. That's the read part. Now you guys have read the Constitution. I always challenge people. I like to read it once a month. All right, I'm crazy, but I like people to read it because you said you've read it and you've read it more than once. Next step is study. Study the Constitution. This is the book that came out of that crazy idea. This is a clause-by-clause study of the entire Constitution of the United States and the Declaration of Independence. Every sentence, every clause. And I go into detail. I look up words in dictionaries. I look at the history. I look at what our founding fathers said. This is the study. This is where you get the other ideas. And then I've got some other things that they're tchotchkes, right? I got a coffee mug. I was supposed to have some more stuff when my shipping got delayed. But these ideas are to teach. See, we came up with this brilliant idea that at 5 years old, we're going to take our children, we're going to hand them over to government to teach them. And we stopped paying attention to what they're being taught. Now, whether it's kids, grandkids, nieces, nephews, you can teach them. It doesn't have to be a formal class. People say, when can I start teaching them? I said, here's a coloring book. Tell them the stories. That's a place to start. And obviously, I have more information. So you found my website. This is also a little bit about what I do.
This is what I saw on your.
Yep. So that's the Constitution Study website. That is where I post a weekly article, a weekly video. I've got a podcast. You can find me on iCloud, on Apple, on Google Play, on most of the podcasting forums. Right? I'm also on America Out Loud 5 days a week at 3 p.m. Central Time. So if you listen to America Out Loud, if you get the America Out Loud podcast, I'm on there. But I started this other group called the Constitution Scholars. See, when I got kicked off of Facebook, I realized that the ideas of freedom and liberty and rights are unpopular. And I also realized that we tend to be isolated. I'm sitting in my office all by my lonesome. What am I to do, right? It feels very lonely. So I created this as a place where we can get together. It is free to sign up. You have to sign up, but it's free. I have community groups. I have one for the federal constitution, and I have one for each of the state constitutions. So you can find other people that are just as interested, people in your state, people that are interested in what's going on in your state. I pop articles in there that are meant to start discussions about. This is a place where you can meet each other, talk, discuss, be involved, so that we realize we're not alone. That's the scariest part, is being alone, right? That's how we hang together. Now, there's also a library on there. So I've got some of my books are available on there. I'm building a reference library of all the reference sources I use when I'm studying, building up there. Again, that's all free to sign up. I also have a mentoring system up there. So the apprentice class, the starting class is $5 a month. And it is more books, but I'm also building people, and I'm trying to get apprentices matched up with journeymen and masters to help you. You said, I go talk to a sheriff. What do I say? How do I do that? That's kind of the role of the apprentice, of that mentoring program. You start as an apprentice, there's apprentice, there's journeyman, there's master. And it's meant to, so you're not alone. There's someone that will help you. How do I study the Constitution? I got stuck on this idea. Help me understand it. Or better yet, how do I explain this to somebody else? Remember, because it's all read, study, teach. That's what I do. That's why I came up here. I came up here to show you that you are not powerless before the government. We created the government, not the other way around. We created the states created the federal government, not the other way around. But as long as we live in the land where the emperor has no clothes and no one points out the fact that the federal government doesn't have the authority to do these things, or as long as we go along with the fiction that Joe Biden can do whatever he can write down in an executive order, then we don't live in a free republic. We aren't free citizens. We are subjects. We are slaves. The choice really doesn't belong to anyone else. It's not going to be fixed by a political party. It's not going to be fixed by a politician. It's going to be fixed when we, the people, resume our place as the rightful masters of both Congress and the courts. As Abraham Lincoln said, the rightful masters of the Congress and the courts, not to overthrow the Constitution, but to overthrow the people who pervert the Constitution. So that, let me open up some questions. You said, shoot.
Under the Constitution, any of the states, the states have the right to secede.
Ooh, that's a question that gets asked a lot. The Constitution, the question that was asked is, do states have the right to secede? There is no secession mechanism in the Constitution, right? Now, the argument is made that the 10th Amendment says, since that's not a power delegated to the federal government, to the United States, it would be retained by the states. And really, the only way to do that is to break the compact. So if a state wanted to secede, they would have to basically say, we're breaking this compact. The founding fathers actually considered putting secession language in the Constitution. The problem, and the reason they didn't, as I understand it from my studying, is it becomes, I'm going to take my ball and go home. Just look what the Texas Democrats did. We're not getting our way, so we're going to leave. Imagine every state in the union that says, if I don't get my way, I'm walking out. It becomes chaos. So the only legal mechanism for a state to secede would be to effectively break the compact that is the Constitution. Now, it would not, all the other signatories would still be there, but you basically are breaking the compact. It's what the Confederate States did when they seceded. They said, we're going to break the compact, and it's no different than when America says we're pulling out of this treaty. It's basically the same thing. What do I got here? Oh, I got a hello. JB, hello, JB. Okay, so here's what we're gonna do. It's gonna be a little bit of a bouncy thing around because I'm live here in Grand Forks, North Dakota. I've got my live stream running on YouTube and the website and Periscope. I have someone here that's actually got me on Facebook, and I've got the Zoom call. So I've got Zoom in my ear. I've got YouTube and Periscope on my screen, and I have this guy who's going to take care of his stuff. Let the questions go, man. Let's let it have it. So the Facebook. So my name is Paul Engel. I am a constitutional scholar. By the way, a scholar doesn't mean I'm an expert. It means I'm a student. I'm a continual student of the Constitution of the United States of America. I run an organization called The Constitution Study. You can find me at constitutionstudy.com. I am here in North Dakota this week doing what I'm calling my Knowing Your Rights tour, where I am teaching people about their rights, hopefully to encourage them to read the Constitution and learn how to defend their rights. So, did you want more?
When going to be this week?
Oh, actually, yeah. So I'm going to be, let's say it's Thursday, right? Right. So tomorrow I'm going to be in Killdeer, North Dakota. Tomorrow afternoon. Saturday, I'm going to be in Menoken Grove outside of Bismarck. Sunday, I'm up in Tioga. Monday, I drive down to Thermopolis, Wyoming. Tuesday, I'm in Douglas, Wyoming. And then I drag my tongue back to where I live outside of Nashville, Tennessee. Now, yes. So if you want more information, go to constitutionstudy.com/tour, T-O-U-R. You'll find out more about the tour. You'll see the schedule. Plus, if you go to the bottom of the page, you can ask that I bring this to a location near you. It doesn't need to be a big grand event. I got one guy we're meeting in a bakery, right? But you can fill out the form. We'll get in contact. I'll set up a Zoom call, and we can discuss how you can get me to where you're going, to wherever you are, to talk to whatever group you've got. I know one group that's trying to get me down into Florida. I know one group that's trying to get me up into Idaho. So that's all there. And check out that website. There's a lot of articles. I put an article once a week. As I said, I'm on the radio 5 days a week. You can ask questions there, but I really want you to ask questions here so we can all enjoy the interesting questions and answers. And I'm surprised. I usually get more questions than this. My crowd's quiet today. Hey, Zoom room, how you doing? Come on, someone's got to have a question.
All right.
Zoom room, you're going to have to speak up because I got too many screens open to be watching the chat.
Okay. Well, I'll just start this one. I don't know if you've covered this already, but
Actually, hang on a second. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put you on the okay. Ask your questions. That everybody can hear it.
Oh, hello everybody.
Well,
Okay. Oh.
Yeah, it's not quite loud enough.
Oh, all
Let me
right.
put you back in my ear so I can go. All right, go ahead.
All right. So, does the Constitution supremacy disappear when the Supreme Court opines? I'm asking this so the audience hears that.
Oh,
answer.
does it? All right. So the question: does constitutional supremacy stop when the Supreme Court opines? Points for saying opines, not rules. A lot of people like to say the Supreme Court ruled. Federal courts don't rule. They're not our rulers. They opine. The Supreme Court is a creation of the Constitution. Therefore, the Supreme Court is subject to the Constitution, not its master. In fact, if you go back, as I have actually done, and you read the Supreme Court case, Marbury versus Madison, one of the questions for the court was, Mr. Marbury had been issued, had won a judicial seat. He had been appointed, he'd been nominated by the president, he'd been approved by the Senate, but before the president, the Secretary of State actually signed his commission, a new administration came in. And James Madison, the new Secretary of State, would not sign the commission. So Marbury sued Madison and asked the court to order the Secretary of State to sign the commission for his judicial appointment. The court said, you know what? Mr. Marbury has a right to this appointment. He has the right to sue, but we don't have the authority to order the executive to do anything. We cannot order the executive branch to do something. Therefore, you end up with the quote from that very same case here, where he says, thus the particular phraseology of the Constitution of the United States confirms and strengthens the principle supposed to be essential to all written constitutions, that a law repugnant to the Constitution is void, and that courts, as well as other departments, are bound by that instrument. That's kind of a long way to saying, no, the supremacy clause does not disappear simply because the Supreme Court says so. In fact, I would go so far to say, should a judge repeatedly violate their oath of office and place themselves above the Constitution, that would be considered bad behavior, right? If we set up rules, we had a game, we were setting up rules, and you repeatedly violated the rules, wouldn't that be considered bad behavior? Well, how long does the federal judge serve? During good behavior. Right? I contend that a judge that repeatedly abuses the Constitution, that repeatedly puts Supreme Court precedent above the Constitution and the statutory laws, is behaving badly, should be impeached. So that was a good question. Someone's asked, what time am I in Douglas? Go to constitutionstudy.com/tour. You'll see all the locations there. Douglas is the last one on the list. I've got the details as far as time and location there.
Does that apply to state judges too?
Does that apply to state judges too? Well, who here remembers the 10th Amendment? I'm sorry, the Supremacy Clause. I got myself a little twisted there. The Supremacy Clause. Article 6, Clause 2 states, that's wrong slide, it's in here. Article 6, Clause 2. This Constitution and the laws of the United States which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby, anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding. So that kind of says, yeah, but I'll take it one step farther. See, Clause 3 says, the senators and representatives before mentioned, and the members of the several state legislatures, and all executive and judicial officers, both of the United States and of the several states, shall be bound by oath or affirmation to support this Constitution. But no religious test shall ever be required as qualification to any office or public trust under the United States. So not only are they bound by it, kind of as Justice Marshall said, they have to swear from an oath to support it. So I'd consider that kind of a double whammy, wouldn't you?
So who impeaches your senators and representatives and judges?
At the state level, that'd be controlled by the state constitution. In general, every state but one has two houses in the legislature. You have usually assembly or a representatives, and then you have a Senate. Impeachment almost always starts with the more populous of those two houses. No, there's usually your state assembly, your state house of representatives. Now that's because that's a federal example, but almost every state, at least every state I've looked at, it usually starts with, of those two houses, whichever one is more populous, that's usually where it starts.
I mean, just the state with the exception.
I believe it's Virginia is a unicameral legislature. So there's actually only 99 state legislative houses because they've only got one. They had to be different.
Any more questions about that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Does the Constitution allow for taxation in any form?
Yes. Well, by any form, do you mean, does it allow any sort of taxation, or does it allow any taxation Congress comes up with? Because there's two ways you can answer that question, right? So does it allow for taxation? Yes. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1. The Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. So Congress can collect taxes, duties, and when you talk about duties, imposts, excises, these are all forms of taxes, right? But they are only to be used to pay for the debt, common defense, and the general welfare of the United States. The United States is the proper noun for the Union, right? Not the general welfare of the individual states, which they refer to as several states, or of the people. In fact, when James Madison was a member of the House of Representatives, they were trying to pass what's called the Cod Fisheries Bill. And in the Cod Fisheries Bill, they wanted a bounty to get people that there aren't enough people fishing for cod. So he said, we'll pay you to go fish for cod. And he had this very eloquent speech where he said, listen, the Constitution doesn't allow that. We did not, the general welfare was not meant to be a blanket clause that Congress can do anything they think to be the general welfare. Why would we have detailed powers if the general welfare clause says they can do whatever they want? If the Congress gets to determine what the general welfare is, well, they may pay for roads other than post roads. They may pay for schools. They may pay for churches. In fact, they may pay for law enforcement. Anything could possibly be considered the general welfare if Congress so thought of it. So they can collect taxes, but they're only allowed to spend those taxes on certain specific things. A small fraction of what they actually spend it on. Now, Article 1, Section, get the right one. Nope, hang on. Yeah. There we go. Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3. Representatives and direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states which may be included within this union according to their respective numbers, which shall be determined by adding the whole number of free persons, and they go into the 3/5 clause. So the federal government is not allowed to tax you directly. They're only allowed to tax you through the states, with the single exception, which comes in the 16th Amendment, which allows them to tax income in whatever form they want. Yes, that's why I said this book here, How the 16th and 17th Amendments Destroyed the Republic. 16th Amendment was the first time the federal government was able to come into your wallet to collect taxes. They had to go through the states, which put the states as a buffer between you and the federal government. In fact, before 1913 and the 16th Amendment, unless you were in the military, your only contact with the federal government was the U.S. Post Office. So yes, they can tax. They can put excises. They can put imposts. They can put duties, which is how they get excises. How they get around with the gas tax, right? The gasoline tax. Yep. All right, because it's an excise. Right? But that money's only supposed to be used for paying the debts, for the common defense, and the general welfare of the Union, of the Union called the United States. No, no, actually, only, well, interstate highways you might consider post roads, but unless it's considered a post road, no. To connect post offices, right? Yes, that you have to remember when this was written. Yeah, basically they had to have roads. So if you had a post office here in, let's say you're here in Grand Forks and there's a post office in Fargo, there has to be a road between Grand Forks and Fargo for the mail to go across. All right. Now, the logic of the interstate system originally did cover a lot of mail. They used mail. You'll still see mail trucks. So there's kind of a quasi, maybe we can get away with it, but that's not the reason why Eisenhower wanted an interstate system. He wanted an interstate system for two reasons. One, Germany had an Autobahn, and he thought that was cool. So he wanted something like the Germans had. The other is he justified it is the common defense. I don't know if you notice, if you drive on the interstate, every so often you will find a section of flat road, straight road with no obstructions, no bridges, no towers, no nothing. So planes can land in a national emergency. But that is it. So this infrastructure bill, completely illegal. The infrastructure bill is, it's embezzlement. Oh yeah, it's embezzlement because well, think of it. What this is, it's even worse. It's embezzlement and bribery, both at the same time. It's great. We work on something else, we'll find a trifecta. So the government is taking money to spend on something they're not authorized to. Now, if you work for a company and you spend their money on something you're not authorized to, what do we call that? Embezzlement, right? So Congress is embezzling trillions of dollars. That's nothing new. They do that all the time. But they're also using that money to curry favor with the states, right? Oh, you have an infrastructure problem. Your roads are old. Your bridges are old. You need help. We'll give you money. What is it called when I offer you something of value in exchange for something else? We call that bribery, right? So the states are saying, so the federal government is offering the states a bribe, and you know the states are going to accept it because they always do. But they're also offering you a bribe. Because there's goodies in there, like was it the rural broadband internet or other things that programs we see, vote for us, we're going to spend someone else's money on you. So you're accepting a bribe too. In fact, the entire federal government, in fact, most governments today work completely on bribery and embezzlement. That's pretty much the way they work. Okay, any more questions? Come on. I thought I'd get lots of questions. I thought I'd be dealing with bombarding with questions. Yeah, you're not going to be able to hear the live audience. So I'm trying to remember to go through this. So yeah, go ahead on Zoom.
I'm just trying to get it straight out of my head. So we have the Supreme Court can opine, and the executive branch is responsible for enforcing that. So when you go to the state level, let's just say I go to the magistrate, how do they enforce, like, say, a sentencing or a fee or whatnot? Is that basically relying on police enforcement, or is that supposed to be something, I don't know, state?
Okay.
I think I see.
So yeah, so we were talking about, and again, it's a separation of powers, and a specific question has to deal with state courts. What happens if the state court opines something? Courts in general have no power. Alexander Hamilton said, at the federal level, courts have neither force nor will, only judgment. They are dependent on the executive branch to exercise any of their judgments. That pretty much is true at the state level. The details will be found in the state constitution. So there may be some subtle differences about how this is done, but in general, when a court issues some sort of order or stay, or it's up to the executive branch to actually enforce that. And this is an important check and balance, right? Because the Supreme Court are not perfect. I offer to you Dred Scott and Korematsu, two absolutely abysmal opinions, one of which is still in force, right? So, well, actually, I'll give you a perfect example, one from today, right? You're all familiar with the CDC eviction moratorium, right? That's completely unconstitutional. Sued, went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court did not declare the CDC eviction moratorium unconstitutional. I know you've been told that. Pundits, talking heads said, I've read the opinion. First of all, the court didn't say much about it. Justice Kavanaugh, in a concurring opinion, said Congress did not give to the CDC the power to issue an eviction moratorium. But if Congress were to issue an eviction moratorium, that would be legal. So the Supreme Court did not say it's unconstitutional, even though it blatantly is. It's a deprivation of property without due process of law, right? It's awful. But President Biden ignored the court and said, okay, I'm going to issue a new eviction, or I'm going to extend the eviction moratorium. What's the court going to do? Now, this is an example where the executive, the president, is piling constitutional failure on top of constitutional failure. I mean, he's making bad worse. But this is no different than Abraham Lincoln. See, back in the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln suspended habeas corpus. Now, the president does not have the authority to suspend habeas corpus. Only Congress does. So when the court said, listen, Mr. President, you don't have the authority to suspend habeas corpus, the president said, thank you for your opinion, but I'm doing it anyway. And then eventually Congress came along and said, yeah, okay, we'll let it ride. All right. The difference between habeas corpus in 1860s and the CDC eviction moratorium here is that the Constitution does grant to Congress the authority to suspend habeas corpus in certain situations. There's nowhere in the Constitution is the Fifth Amendment suspended. And the Fifth Amendment says you cannot be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. If you cannot control your property, it's not really your property anymore. So by telling a landlord, I cannot control who has access to my property, you've deprived him or her of their property. You did not go through due process. You're not punishing them for something. You're basically getting them to pay for the mistakes that at the state, local, and federal government level. So whereas Congress was able to kind of backfill what President Lincoln did, there's no legal way to backfill what President Biden has done through his CDC. Yeah. Does the Constitution allow for executive orders by the president? Yes, with a caveat. Every president has issued executive orders, right? All the way back to George Washington. Now, we didn't start numbering them until the 20th century, but everyone has done it. The thing is, all an executive order is a memo from the chief executive to his subordinate of how to enact his power. Article 2, Clause 1 says, all executive power is vested in a president of the United States. The only person authorized to execute executive power is the president. Now, obviously, you can't do all of that in one person. There's not enough hours in a month to do what you have to do in a day. So we have an executive branch. He has a cabinet. He has other officials. They work for him. Kind of like a president of a company has underlings that does his work or her work. So the president issues orders to the executive branch on how to exercise his executive powers to enforce the laws created by Congress. Because right, his oath of office, faithfully execute the laws of the United States. Okay, let's say I'm president, faithfully execute the laws of the United States. Okay, you are, let's pick something actually constitutional. You're the Secretary of Defense, right? So here's an executive order about how I want you to organize the military to defend the homeland. That's legal, right? Because you're my underling, I'm giving you an order. You're the Secretary of, let's see, I want to pick, I'm having a hard time thinking of a constitutional, let's say you're the Secretary of Commerce, because you have interstate commerce, right? So I can issue an executive order that says, okay, we're going to deal with this to regulate interstate commerce, make interstate commerce regular, right? That's what we're going to do. So we got defense, we've got commerce. You're the Secretary of the Treasury, because we can coin money. I don't know, that might be a bad idea. We can coin money, right? So Congress says we need $1 billion in quarters, right? We need X amount of money. We need it in currency. So President, go do that. Okay, Secretary of Treasury, I need you to make sure that we get $1 billion in quarters or whatever it is to fulfill the laws that Congress has passed. Those are all legitimate executive orders. Anything else is an illegal act. It is an act of a delegated authority, right? Because the president is delegated authority in the Constitution, contrary to the tenor of the commission under which it is exercised. In other words, the Constitution says, President, you can execute the laws of the United States, and only the laws that are pursuant to the Constitution are actually supreme. So when the president issues an executive order to say, oh, let's say Health and Human Services. Better yet, let's say Department of Education. He says, I want you to write a letter to all the schools telling them to allow anybody to use any bathroom they want, or they're going to lose their federal money. Right? He's not executing the law of the United States. He's implementing a policy. He's not, yes, he's technically directing his underling, but he's directing his underling to break the law. Now, if you serve in the military, as I understand it, and I never did serve in the military, but if you serve in the military, you're required to follow all lawful orders, correct? Right? So if an officer over you orders you to do something illegal, are you required to follow that order? No. But you see, most people don't understand that. They just say, well, okay, there's an order and he's going to go do it. And then you're the superintendent of some school getting this very official looking dear colleague letter that says, I got to do this, or the federal government's going to cut off the spigot. Well, first of all, the fact that you're accepting federal money means you're accepting bribes to begin with. So I don't have a lot of sympathy for you because you put yourself in that situation. But that is an illegal executive order because it's beyond the bounds of US law, which includes the Constitution of the United States. Does that answer your question? Anyone else? There's no one on YouTube? I'm not getting any questions from YouTube, which is odd. I usually get some very good ones. How about Facebook?
Nope, they're just commenting on your Elizabeth and bribery.
Comments are great. I love comments. I appreciate comments. I like questions more because questions are how we open up to new ideas.
So what about, there's a thing that's going on at Fargo here in North Dakota where the school board said it's pretty much mandatory for all kids to have a mask.
Mm-hmm.
Is that violating their constitutional rights?
Well, let's think about that. We talked about this earlier. So you're setting me up.
No, yeah.
I didn't say it was a bad way. All right. So we discussed earlier that to require the wearing of a mask. Now, this is very important. Let's take two different schools. Over here, we're going to have the public school. Over here, we're going to have the private school. So on the one hand, you have a public school. On the other hand, we have a private school. Very important, different distinction. A public school is by definition public. It's owned by the public. It's held by the government. Therefore, you're saying, we're asking, does the government have the authority to deprive children of their liberty and control of their bodies without due process of law? The answer is no. Now, why would a private school be different? Because a private school is by definition private property. And now we have what is often a confusing situation, that is a conflict of rights. Now, when I study rights, when I teach about rights, I summarize rights in two simple sentences. You can only legitimately exercise a right if it does not infringe on the rights of another. Right? We all have rights. I'll pick on free speech, right? I have the right to stand up here and speak. Now, does that mean I have the right to lie about you, to defame your character, to slander you? Do I have that right? But there's consequences for that, aren't there?
Well, I have a recourse. I can sue you.
In other words, my right to free speech doesn't protect me from the damages I cause, from the consequences I cause when I hurt someone else, right? Okay. Very well put, by the way. So yes, I have the right, but there are consequences of that. In fact, anybody who's heard someone say the Supreme Court said it's unconstitutional to yell fire in a crowded theater has never read the actual opinion. I have. The Supreme Court never said that. What it said was that your right to free, you can no more use the right to free speech to protect you from the consequences of that speech than you could if you were to falsely yell fire in a crowded theater. So yes, I have that right, but there are going to be consequences, and I can't claim free speech to get out of it. The same way I can't sit on a stand in a courtroom and lie under oath without there being consequences, right? That's so to legitimately, that would be an illegitimate exercise of my right. I'm using it for an illegitimate purpose. So the other part is, for a right to be legitimate, you must be able to exercise it without infringing on someone else's rights. That's for a different discussion, but I want to focus on the first half. So here we have a problem. I have private property. The owners of that school, whether that be an individual, a board, a corporation, whatever, they have property rights. That's their property. The government can't deny them control of their property without due process. So can I legitimately, as a private individual, deprive them of control of their property? So if they say to get on my property, by the way, this works just as well for any private business. To get onto my property, I want you to wear a mask. If you're not wearing a mask when you come on my property, you're coming here legitimate, you are trespassing. That's the distinction. And that distinction got not understanding that distinction got one lady arrested like 3 times in Dallas, Texas, because private businesses were putting up mask signs, and she would enter without a mask because the governor had said there's no mask mandate in Texas. Yeah, that's private property. And the example I always use, because this usually, so at this point, usually someone's going, but, take away the private business, make it your personal property. How would you be treated if that was your home or your personal business rather than somebody else's business?
So therefore, if you've got a Costco, let's say that you must wear a mask. And by the way, when you go to Costco, wear a mask, that's what you're saying.
Mhm.
That is a publicly held corporation. It is not privately held.
It's a publicly traded corporation, right? Very important. So the question was Costco, and she referred to as Costco or any corporation as publicly held. They are not publicly held, they're publicly traded. They're actually owned by the stockholders.
So therefore, the collective owners is private.
Yes. No different than if we were all to get together and say, we're going to form our own little, sub S corp or something like that. We're all going to have shares in this business. It's ours. We own it. Same thing, just writ large. But we have a problem somehow when it gets large, we tend to depersonalize it, which is why I say when you're dealing with just imagine it was you or maybe just your family. You had a question.
So, a public school, can I correlate that with the Air Force base that now requires us to wear masks?
Oh, excellent question. So can we correlate a public school with an Air Force base? Well, is an Air Force base public property? Who owns the Air Force base? Federal government, right? And the federal government is controlled by us. So I would say, yes, you could correlate that to an Air Force base. I think the one area you might run into, the issue you have, the only issue you might run into is Air Force bases are regulated by Congress, right? Congress has the authority to create for Washington, D.C., forts, arsenals, bases, and needful buildings. Those are federal properties. By the way, the fact that the most of the land in the West is actually owned by the federal government is to me, that was embezzlement, but actually that was extortion. But so Congress can regulate Air Force bases. Therefore, I suppose you could make an argument that if Congress, I think, put it this way, I think I know 99 out of 100 judges, 999 out of 1,000 judges is going to say Congress has the right to regulate Air Force bases. Therefore, Congress has the right to set the rules for getting onto Air Force bases or entering federal property. But I still think in my heart of hearts that there's a Fifth Amendment problem because, wait a second, you're deprived. Now, the biggest issue actually would be not with so much the Air Force base, it's with the civilians on the Air Force base. Because remember, when you join the military, you voluntarily give up some of your rights during your term of service, right? You are owned by the federal government. But what about the civilians on base? Do they give up their rights simply because their loved one has been based on that base?
Can I jump in here real quick, Paul?
Yeah, I got something to read. Go ahead.
The Air Force Base is not a public access point. The civilians don't have access to the Air Force Base unfettered. You have to have permission to enter the Air Force Base. This is a restricted area as far as being a military installation.
Understood. But all right, so the point he made was Air Force bases are not public access. It's not a question of access. It's a question of ownership. Who owns the Air Force Base? Ownership determines whether or not something's public or private, not access. See, that's what the problem with all these public access laws, these public accommodation laws, they turn public access into public ownership. They say, if you open your doors to the public, suddenly you are no longer in control of that property. We get to regulate you. Right. So I understand the question of of not being public access, but it's a question primarily for civilians in a publicly owned piece of property. Anybody, well, yeah, anybody that's going to go on base. All right. And the question then becomes if they are a civilian, in other words, if they are no longer subject to the UCMJ, if they're no longer effectively owned by the federal government, what right can they be deprived of their rights by simply entering federal property? And I understand there are security issues around a military base that would be different than, say, a federal courthouse. All right, that's where Congress gets into regulating the rules, setting the rules for the Air Force Base. So that's why I said it's kind of one of those. I probably want to noodle on that, gnaw on that for a while to really get down to a good, solid answer. It's a very good question, but like I said, on the one hand, Congress can set the rules for a military base, but does that mean they can deprive someone of their rights simply because they enter federal property? Because if that's the case, they can deprive you of your rights when you enter a federal courthouse. And that is a problem because the federal government can demand that you show up at a federal courthouse. Right? They can't demand that you show up at an Air Force base unless you're in the military, but they can demand that you show up at a federal courthouse. They send you that little thing in the mail, that little jury duty thingy. So, good question. I hadn't thought about that one. Yeah.
You were just saying that when you're in the military, they own you.
Effectively. They don't legally own you, but you do voluntarily give up many of your rights when you join the military.
I had a call from a lady this week, National Guard troop in DC, was told they have three options. One, get the job. Two, get a forced job. Or three, dishonorable discharge.
I would tell her to look at I wrote about it. It's on the website. The actual FDA, the actual U.S. code that enables emergency use authorizations. The best person to get in contact with is actually Chris Ann Hall, because she's also former military and she's studied this. It is actually federal law. You cannot be forced to take an emergency use authorization. They make a distinction in the law between FDA approved and emergency use authorizations. Now, when I read the law, and I've actually sent an email to get more specifics from Ms. Hall, but the law says before you get the jab or any emergency use, which, by the way, would also include the COVID test, you are supposed to be told this is an emergency use authorization. This is not an FDA approved drug, product, whatever. You're supposed to be given the details of the benefits and risks, including risks they aren't entirely sure about. You know, they have to tell you, we don't know what this is going to do. They have to tell you how much they don't know about what it's going to do, right? And that you have the right to accept or refuse the emergency use product and the consequences of doing so. Now, the military detail, I'm not sure of, but I would contact chrisannhall.com. I don't know how good she is at responding I haven't heard back from her. I've heard that's not uncommon. She's a very busy lady, but I know she's talked about this, and I know she's also former military, and she's made a point that it's actually, it may be actually part of the UCMJ. I haven't looked that deeply, that you cannot be required to take an experimental drug as part of your military service.
Would there be a difference if these people are told by the federal government, they're in Washington, that they're National Guard troops?
No, because your rights don't end at an arbitrary border.
But doesn't the governor, isn't he like commander-in-chief, the governor of the state, you're the National Guard?
But the guard that's in Washington, D.C. has been federalized, the illegally federalized, by the way. Who called up the National Guard to serve in Washington, D.C.? Well, that gets into a different question. But when the military is called, when the National Guard is called into federal service, the president is their commander-in-chief, right? So they are no longer under the governor, they're under, but my question is, all these federal guard troops, did Congress call up the National Guard, or did Nancy Pelosi? Because if Nancy Pelosi did it, those National Guard people, it's like, no, that's an illegal order. Nancy Pelosi does not have the authority to call up the National Guard.
So it's the governor's responsibility if that was the case to call them back, because that's a lawful use of National Guard.
Yes. And in fact, I don't remember who, but there's like 1 or 2 states where the governor has said, listen, you're bleeding us dry with our guards, our troops in covering Washington, D.C., and you're not paying us back for it. We're pulling them out. And I saw somebody say, well, they can't. And I'm like, unless Congress pass an act to call up the militia, Congress has no authority to say no.
Yeah, and the reason is I remember the Constitution doesn't make the criteria.
Right, because the National Guard, well, this is where linguistic gymnastics becomes very interesting. So,
I have to ask you a question. I don't ask you about it
okay.
again. Militia equated with national.
So the militia, by definition, is the armed civilians, right? Now, federal law distinguishes 2 different militias, the organized militia and the unorganized militia. The National Guard and the Reserve are considered the organized militia. But it also recognizes that every able-bodied person from 18 to 45 is considered part of the militia.
Say 45?
That's federal law. That's not the Constitution. Right. Let's see, what was I looking for?
So everybody between the ages of 18 and 45 constitute what?
The unorganized militia.
Okay, that's federal law.
That's U.S. law. That's how the federal government defines militia. But the dictionary is any armed civilian is a part of the militia. Yeah, any armed militia and any armed civilian. Think back to the Revolutionary War, right? You had the army, and then you had all the farmers with guns. They were the militia. And I still like the fact that John Quincy Adams at age, what, 12, was doing musket drills with the Massachusetts militia. I was looking for, okay, there we are. It's Article 1, Section 8, to provide for the calling forth of the militia to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrection, and repel invasion. Now, if you are Nancy Pelosi and referring to January 6th as an insurrection, why do you think they keep using the term insurrection? Because one, it legitimizes these actions, even though it does not meet the definition of an insurrection. The sad part is we actually had last year an insurrection in the United States. We had several of them. Anybody remember CHOP? Right? Not simply the riots, but you actually had people taking over and saying, we are now separate from the United States. We have our own rules. We have our own laws. That's an insurrection. They were replacing the legitimate government with another one. Hey, Tunnel Lord, would you do me a favor? Would you go over to YouTube and make sure that I'm not missing these chats? Because I'm not getting anything, and that's kind of odd.
All right. Well, yeah, I'll do that.
Yeah, go ahead.
I have a couple law dictionaries, and I would like to know which law dictionaries plural you consider the most accurate ones.
I have no clue. I'm not a lawyer. I don't play one on TV.
But you're saying look up these definitions. Where are you
I use the Free Legal Dictionary online, or I use Cornell's online law dictionary. I tend to use those two.
There appears to be nobody asking questions.
Okay. I just want to make sure something wasn't broken on my system. That's all. Thank you. All right, more questions. Let me have it. Come on, you guys on Zoom, you're usually so much more interactive. Don't be shy just because we're here in North Dakota. They don't bite much. I don't know. They bite hard.
Once we
But-
put our teeth in.
But yeah, once they put their teeth in, they bite hard. But they've had their shots.
I do have something that I want to say that I just found out. I remember having read it a long time ago, and I reread it last week. The president is only the commander-in-chief when Congress has declared a legal war.
Not quite. So the statement you read somewhere, that the president is only commander in chief when Congress has declared a legally declared war. Okay.
Like, for instance, Vietnam was never legally declared. Vietnam care of that.
We haven't declared war since World War II. We haven't declared war since December 7th, 1941.
So the Gulf War was not a war.
Well,
The Gulf War was not a war.
all right. So I first of all, I have to pick on December 7th because that was my mother-in-law's birthday. A day that will live in infamy was December 7th. I love my mother-in-law. But the question is, the Constitution doesn't define how you declare a war. So all right. So yes, you have the formal, we declare war on Germany. That's obvious, right? If I tell Michael I'm going to give you $1,000 to go fight the Olive Garden across the street. You can buy ammunition, whatever you need. Have I authorized him to commit an act of war? Well, let's say I have the legal authority to do this, right? Let's be real here, right? But let's say I have the legal authority and I am ordering you to go do something. I'm authorizing you to commit an act of war. Haven't I sort of declared war by committing an act of war under my authority? So the question of how does Congress declare a war could easily be am I authorizing acts of war, as it is a wording saying we hereby declare war. If I authorize an act of war, I'm kind of declaring war, aren't I? But
To make it happen, you would need the finance, just to say, hey, folks, go over to the Olive Garden, but if I don't have the finances.
exactly,
It
That's-
has to be some type of
I
transaction.
gave you money, right?
Right.
I made a point of saying I give you money, buy what you need, go commit an act of war. So when Congress funds these actions, they're also agreeing with what's going on. Now, I'm finding this here. Here we go. Article 2, Section 2. The president shall be the commander-in-chief of the Army and Navy of the United States and of the militia of the several states when called into actual service of the United States. He may, so he is commander-in-chief of the Army and Navy always. He is the commander-in-chief of the militia when they're called into service. Now, I've been talking to English professors because my family's full of English people. I'm not one of them. There's a comma in there that makes me question something there, but no, it's not a question. He's not the commander-in-chief when war is declared. He is commander-in-chief of the Army and Navy and the militia when they're called into service.
What about the Air Force?
The Air Force is a spin-off of the Army. The Marines are a spin-off of the Navy. The Coast Guard actually gets real interesting because they've played games with the Coast Guard. Look, as I'm not 100% sure on this, but as I understand it, the Coast Guard technically isn't in the military. They're law enforcement, and they did that to get around. Well, they said to get around posse comitatus, but posse comitatus doesn't count on the high seas. It doesn't count in the ocean. It doesn't count on the water. When I wrote, when I was researching for the book, posse comitatus specifically identifies the Army, not the Navy. So that gets, there's some little tricky things in there we need to work on. So yes, it's quite common, and I understand why someone would like to say, well, before he can command the military, but understand, commander-in-chief doesn't make him all powerful over the military, because who has the power to regulate the military? Yes. So all he can do, he's basically the top general. Right? He is not, he cannot order the military to do something that Congress, that's in violation of a congressional regulation. So for example, let's say, we're pulling troops out of Afghanistan. Let's say Congress passes a resolution that says, no, we're not pulling troops out of Afghanistan. The president can't legally order them out then. He says, no, we're telling you they have to go there. We're regulating the military. Follow our orders. See, the idea that the president's the most powerful man in the world is a myth. It's the emperor has no clothes. Read Article 2. Do you know what the president can do without the help of Congress? He can pardon. He can accept foreign dignitaries, right? He can meet and greet foreign dignitaries. And he can call Congress into special session under emergency circumstances. And if the two houses of Congress cannot figure out when they're going to recess, he can decide for them. That's it. Everything else requires the assistance of Congress. In fact, do you know why we have what we call the Electoral College, which, by the way, is a misnomer? Do you know why we have an Electoral College? Do you know why we have the Electoral College? Nope. The reason we have the Electoral College is because the president doesn't work for the people. He works for the states. The states elect the president, not the people. But notice Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2, each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors, equal to the whole number of senators and representatives to this which the state may be entitled in Congress. The states appoint electors. Now, the states have decided to do so primarily via a popular election within the state. That's a state decision. So look at the role of the president. What is he? He says, legislature, you pass the laws. President, you execute the laws. All the laws? No, only the laws of the United States. Not the states, not local laws. That's his. He's going to nominate. judges, ambassadors, other officials. But who actually approves them? No, the Senate,
That's true.
right?
It's the Senate.
Just the Senate. Why is that important? The two houses of Congress have very different makeups for a reason. There's two reasons we have two houses of Congress. One has to do with big states versus small states. Big states wanted power, so they wanted a portion by population, so they would have more representation, more influence. Little states didn't like that. Little states wanted to be represented equally. Big states didn't like that because they didn't get all the power. So it's all right, we'll compromise. We'll have two houses. But what they set up was the House of Representatives was always elected by the people in order to represent the people in the legislative process. The Senate was originally appointed by the state legislature to represent the state in the federal legislative process. So if you look at the powers delegated to the president, whenever he works with Congress, it's always with the advice and consent of the Senate, the representatives of the states. He is there as an ambassador. He's basically an executive of the states. His job is to do the work for them, not the people, which is why the 17th Amendment is the other amendment that destroyed the Republic. The 17th Amendment said we're going to have a popular election for senators, and because of that, they no longer represent the interests of the states because the states don't put them in office. So the states no longer have a say in federal legislation.
Now, why would that have occurred? Because the states. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, that's a very good question. The question is why? Why would they do that? A publicity campaign, basically. So you had a few people saying, "Listen, this whole legislative appointment, that's corrupt. We can't have that. No, we need to give the appointment of senators to the people. Besides, states can, the legislatures, they're politicians. They can argue. I mean, they can argue a stone to death. We can't leave them in charge. They're going to be states that don't have representation in the Senate because the legislature can't get their thumb out of their backside. This can't be allowed. We have to have popular election of the senators." Now, what you ever notice how a magician works? He shows you right up here. Look at what I'm doing here. Look at what I'm doing there. Well, on the other hand, he's doing the sneaky stuff, right? Here's the sneaky stuff. How many senators before the 17th Amendment, do you know how many senators were removed from office because they had been placed by a corrupt process? One. Between 1787 and 1913, one, and even that was questionable. And of course, there's never, ever, ever been corruption in a popular election. So why did the states agree with this? Well, I believe there's two reasons. One is they were just as ignorant about the Constitution then as we are now. Well, almost, right? You see, we teach these bromides, and no one taught people that, hey, wait a second, the role of the Senate is to represent the states in the federal legislature. So if you are a citizen and they had this, hey, we got this great idea. We want to be much more democratic. By the way, we're not a democracy, we're a republic. We want to be much more democratic though. So we're gonna make us more democratic. I'm channeling AOC right now. We want to make us more democratic. So we're going to let you choose your own senators. Isn't that wonderful? You'll have control over the senators. And they ignore the fact that, by the way, the states no longer have a say in federal legislation. So when the federal government comes along and says, hey, somebody comes up and says, I got this wonderful piece of legislation. We know what we're going to do. We're going to take care of medical benefits for old people. And we're going to get the state to pay for it. Now, if you're appointed by the state legislature, what do you think is going to happen if you vote for that? You're going to get your bell rung. Do you know states used to recall U.S. senators if they didn't do what the legislature said? Yes, a very good thing. But now, guess what? Now you're a popularly elected senator. So I'm saying, hey, give me your vote, I'll give you the free healthcare. Give me your vote, I'll give you the free Social Security. Give me your vote, I'll give you other free goodies. That's how. So what do? You then go, you contact your legislature. Oh no, 17th Amendment, man, we got to pass this. We got to have this. This is the right way to go. Because in general, we don't think second and third order. We never say, and then what? We don't know the Constitution. We knew it better back then, but still not very well. I promulgate. Because the education system started going down about 1890s.
What year was the 17th Amendment passed?
1913. 1913, 16. A lot happened in 1913. And here's the interesting thing. So picture a graph, right? So you have 1787, and you always have people trying to push the boundaries. You always have people trying to see what they can get away with, right? John Adams tried it. They all tried it. So, but between 1787 and about 1860s, it was a fairly flat line. And then you had the Civil War, and you had Reconstruction. All of a sudden, the federal government assumed a whole bunch of power. It was a lot, but okay. Then you had 1913, and you had hey, let's get popular election of the senators. Hey, let's get an income tax. By the way, there was actually an income tax in 1860s, but there was actually two. There was one in the 1860s, it went away. There was another one later in the 1800s that the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that. Now you have the 16th Amendment. And what happened? Government gets bigger and bigger and bigger faster because now they got money. They got money. They got the states out of the way for the legislation. They're growing. Guess what the next big change was? Right around the 1960s, 1970s. 1960s and 70s. You notice right around Nixon. Nixon started a lot of a Republican. We can't blame all the Democrats. So I say a pox on both their houses. Price controls, wage controls. You had that in I should take that back. You have it in the 40s and then again in the 60s. So 40s with the New Deal, 60s, you start seeing, and every time what you're seeing is somebody gets away with something and they never get slapped for it. Yeah, the 1940s, right? The late 1930s, actually, when FDR was trying to get the New Deal and all these powers the federal government doesn't have, and the Supreme Court slapped him down and said, no, you can't, no, you can't, no, you can't. So she says, listen, either you stop overturning my new plans, or I'm going to pack the court. And he was so popular, they figured he'd get away with it. So they folded because they were afraid that they would just be overrun.
That's why they kicked in the term limits.
They kicked in, well, so presidential term limits. Do you know why we kicked in presidential term limits? Because the Republicans could not defeat FDR. When FDR died, the very next election, the Republicans ran on, listen, we can't let someone serve that long again. Elect us, and we'll push a constitutional amendment to limit the term of the presidency. Now, here's what I want you to understand about term limits. First of all, term limits do not limit the number of terms. The term limits don't limit the president. They limit who you can vote for. Right? If let's say Obama, since he was the last two-term president we had, right? The law says he can't run for a third time. Well, what if you really liked Obama? What if you really, really liked Reagan? You can't choose him anymore. So term limits deprive the people of a choice because the opposition doesn't like the choice that people are making. Notice it wasn't Democrats that supported presidential term limits. It was the Republicans because FDR was a Democrat. The same way most people I hear talking about term limits are usually complaining about an opposing party. Sometimes it's just it's like, oh, you know, these people serve too long. But how often you realize it's rarely your guy. It's really your lady in Congress that you're really complaining about. You're complaining about the Nancy Pelosi's, the Chuck Schumers, the McConnells, right? You're complaining about them. It's never your guy. So the problem number one with term limits is it actually deprives the people of a choice. Now, it deprives people of choice because I don't like the choice they're making. In other words, it's people trying to impose their will on someone else. I don't like the choice you're making, so I'm going to make it impossible for you to make that choice. Now, I understand the sentiment behind that, but the problem is I've now given someone else the authority to tell me what choice I can make. Because it's easier to force my will on someone else than it is to educate someone else. See, every political office is term limited. You decided they've served enough, you stop voting for them. If enough of your fellow citizens agree, they don't serve in that office anymore. But it takes time and effort to educate someone saying, do you really think 40 years in Congress is too long? I know, but he brings home the bacon. Oh, so you're telling me your vote can be bought for goodies? You can be bribed. That takes time. It takes effort, and it's just much easier for me to bully some people into a law. See, it's one of the reasons we're not a democracy. See, people think a democracy is 51% rules. No, it's the people who have it's the biggest bullies rule. If I can intimidate you, either by embarrassment or threats or whatever, to do what you don't want to do, if I can intimidate you into voting for someone to prove you're not a racist, if I can intimidate you to put into place a policy or be called homophobic, if I can intimidate you to donate money to a certain campaign so that we won't march around your corporate offices. There's a reason why. I don't have all the quotes, but several of our founding fathers talked about the dangers of a democracy, that they don't protect private rights, they don't protect property rights, they are as violent in their lives as they are in their deaths. My personal favorite, I actually have a t-shirt. I wanted to bring one here. It didn't deliver in time. I have a new t-shirt up on the website. On the front, it says, democracy, 2 wolves and a lamb voting on what to have for lunch. I got a lamb, I got wolves, I got a mailbox. On the back, it says, liberty, a well-armed lamb contesting the vote. And there's a lamb with an AR-15, right? That's available on the website. They couldn't, my shipping came in late, so I didn't have any here. When we democratize things, and everyone loves the word democracy. Democracies are awful. It is. You don't have rights in a democracy. But we've been so trained that to react positively to the word democracy, people jump when I call them evil. They go, really? Yeah. Just imagine, in 1776, we had a revolution, and we established not a democracy, but a republic. In 1782, whatever, there was another revolution in France. The two distinctions between the two revolutions: ours created a republic, theirs created a democracy. Ours was based on Judeo-Christian values. Theirs was based on secular values. Ours has lasted 245 years. The United States Constitution is the oldest national constitution in the world. The only constitution older than the US Constitution is the Constitution of the state of Massachusetts. How many constitutions has France been through? How many governments has France been through? Generally, they last about 30, 40 years. And then most around the world, you'll see about every 30, 40 years, these secular democracies rip themselves apart and rebuild themselves somehow. So, more questions. How about you on Zoom? Anybody there? You got to, if you want something on Zoom, you'll have to speak up because I got good questions here. Nothing on Facebook? I know I try to explain things really well, but come on, someone's got to have a question on Facebook. You can't give me a zip on Facebook. Don't give me a goose egg. Give me one. There are no stupid questions here. Actually, there's two stupid questions here. There's the one you don't ask and the one you ask 3 times. So if you're wondering about something and you don't ask it, it ain't my fault. How about Zoom? I just heard somebody on Zoom. No, I thought someone was starting to ask a question on Zoom.
I have a question.
Go.
If someone were to buy one of your publications, which one would you suggest for someone just starting out? The one that's comprehensive.
So I follow the John Jay principle, all right? Read, study, teach, crawl, walk, run. First thing I would say is read the Constitution. I don't care if you take a free Constitution. By the way, you can read the Constitution online for free, right? You don't have to buy a Constitution. That would be the place to start, is to read it. Now, I wrote this because you'd be surprised. I actually sell fair amount of these, the How to Read It in 30 Days. And I don't know if it's that daily devotion. That's what this is designed as. Now, some people I know do it because they don't believe they can read the Constitution, that quickly. So they're looking for a structure. So most people, I say, read the Constitution. I don't care if it's this or online. By the way, archives.org, founders.archives.org, wonderful resource. There are a lot of our documents from our founding fathers that you can find on there. That's where I go. That's where I get all my quotes. When I'm writing my material, I'm copying the constitutional text from archives.org, the U.S. Archives, the Federal Archives. So I'm trying to get the right stuff. There's some great material if you're interested. If you want a comprehensive, I want to understand the Constitution. That's what this is designed for.
And how much does that run? I think people online
Yep. This is $25, right? If you buy it online, there's like $5 shipping on top of that, but this is $20. You can also, by the way, buy it. It's also available on Amazon, so you can get it either paperback or Kindle. But what this goes through every clause of the Constitution, and in every clause, my process was, I read the clause, and I tried to figure out how can I explain this in my own words. Right? That's my process of. That's how I learn. Actually, I learn by taking something and explaining it in my own words, and then I would build off of that. So that became the writing of the book. Now, here's the interesting part. From my standpoint, when I had a professional edit that book, we had a disagreement. See, the editor says, no, you're not supposed to write in a conversational voice. You're supposed to write in a formal voice. I'm like, that's not what I want. I want this to be a conversational voice because I want everyday people to understand this. In fact, it's funny, when I started my podcast, after I got started, I wanted a theme song. Now, my pastor, who's also a good friend of mine, he has a band. He does a lot of music. And he had just cut an album. In fact, the CD wasn't even available yet. And he says, let me play this for you. It's the title track of his first CD. The title is Everyday Americans. I'm like, that's it. Now, I'm not a big bluegrass fan, but the concept of everyday Americans, that's who that's written for. I wrote it so everybody can understand it. I sent it to, now you have to understand, I grew up in a family of editors. I grew up around books. I grew up around people who read for a living, who edit for a living. I sent a copy of that to my father. I signed a copy, sent it to my father. My father, was talking to my father one day. Now, my father's 78 years old. I was talking to him one day. He said, thank you so much for the book. You know, he says, I was reading it And I realized I'd never thought of things that way. I'd never realized these certain things about the Constitution. That's why that's written, so that you don't have to be a law expert. You don't have to understand even the big words. So what I did, one thing, I footnoted everything. Right? There's footnotes everywhere. If there's a word that I thought needed some more definition, for example, letters of marque and reprisal. I had no idea what that was. So I went to Noah Webster's 1828 dictionary and I looked it up. And I included the definition in here and the footnote to where to find it. Right. I went through, let's see, what else I got in here? I got a couple other in here about like stuff from our founding fathers. Oh, here we go. Page 168. This is Act, I was telling about the Cod Fisheries Bill. So when I studied the General Welfare Clause, I went through in detail, right? Because Congress does whatever it wants, claiming General Welfare Clause. Do you remember a few years back, somebody passed a rule in the House that said all legislation had to have the justification for that power in the Constitution as a first paragraph? And almost all of them say Article 1, Section 8. It said, we can do it because we said so. I mean, so when I got to Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1, and I read the General Welfare Clause, I went in and I looked and I said, okay, well, let's see. There's the word general from the dictionary. There's the word welfare from the dictionary. Then I went through and I found the debate on the Cod Fisheries Bill granting bounties from the House of Representatives, February 3rd, 1792. This is where James Madison said, wait a second, no. When we wrote this, we were not thinking Congress could do whatever they want. I found that in there. And so I'm not asking you to trust my words. I guess that's the point I'm trying to make. I want you, I'm like Ronald Reagan, right? Trust, but verify. So I give the trust, I give the verify, and it's written. I've had several people who've reviewed the book. In fact, it should be coming out shortly in Old Schoolhouse magazine. They did a review of my book. I thought it was pretty cool. And that's the idea, is it's written so pretty much anybody middle school and up can read it, comprehend it, and apply it.
Hey, Paul.
Just a second, Jen. Mhm.
Okay.
I would love to. In fact, I've talked to several schools. I offered, so by most state and federal law says that you must teach the Constitution on Constitution Day, which is September 17th. I have offered for 4 years, my local school district says, I live here. I will come in for free and do a constitutional lesson. What do you want? Can't get them to reply to me. So public schools don't want to touch that because A, I didn't go to their brainwashing institutes, and B, I contradict the power structure of the progressives. So, all right, Jan, hang on a second. Mike, you had two.
Yes. First one.
Give me one. Just give me one, and I'll let Jan go, and then we'll do that.
Let me read this off Facebook.
Okay.
How can the government mandate everyone to have a vaccination shot against our First Amendment?
How can everyone mandate the vaccination shot? Well, first of all, it's not a First Amendment violation. It's a Fifth Amendment violation. It's depriving you of control of your body, your property, without due process of law. How can they do that? The answer is we let them. See, we have this idea in our head. We act as if somehow the Constitution is going to become the next Marvel superhero. It's going to jump out of its case. It'll have a cape on. It'll fly into Washington, D.C. and just dope slap all those congressmen into submission. It doesn't work like that. It's ink on parchment. It is the authority for you to say no. The Constitution only works when we enforce it. So when the federal officer shows up at your door and saying, you must get the vaccine. By the way, you can find this Knowing Your Rights. It's on the website. If you go to constitutionstudy.com, you search for Knowing Your Rights placard, you'll find it. You can say, I'm sorry, but you are depriving me of my property without due process of law. You are committing a federal crime. The Supreme Court has said a law repugnant to the Constitution is void. I do not have to follow a void law. It is the Constitution is your authority to say no. And we have to learn to say no. More importantly, we have to learn to stand behind the people that are saying no. It's not enough for one person to stand up and say no, they get trampled. Just imagine, picture in your mind, I'm sure we've all remembered the video from Tiananmen Square and the one guy standing in front of the tank. You knew it was going to end bad. It was only a question of when. Now, picture this past summer, picture summer 2020. We got a few hundred people in the streets, a few thousand people in the streets, rooting, rioting, breaking the law. And what do the police do? Now, sometimes they were just ordered to stand there, but there's only so much they can do. It's when we stand together that no has force. When one person goes, no, they don't stand a chance. When 1,000 people say no, it makes a difference. I was at, I don't know, I may be dating myself, but there was a group called Promise Keepers, and they had a big rally down in the mall in Washington, D.C., and I was there. And I will tell you, there is nothing like the sound of 1 million men standing on the mall in Washington, D.C., crying, amen. When 1 million men and women stand in front of the government and say, no, that's when it'll change. Okay, Jan, go ahead.
Okay, I was part of a health freedom rally today in Bismarck. We were standing with nurses and other medical professionals that are fighting against the mandates given by their hospitals. A lot of people were asking me questions about, do we need a permit to protest? And I said, we're just walking up and down a public street. We don't need to ask our government for permission. But I have no idea if I was 100% off on that, do we always have to ask for permission when we're trying to petition against something?
So you have, and I don't know the exact quote, I don't know the exact clause, but I'm pretty sure the North Dakota Constitution protects your, I'm sorry, for the people that are here. The lady on the Zoom was at a freedom rally. She was asked, do they need a permit for what they were doing? Do you need a permit? Now, this is not a First Amendment issue, because First Amendment starts out, Congress shall make no law. There's one and only one Congress. It resides in Washington, D.C. However, the Constitution of North Dakota, because this is happening in Bismarck, I don't remember the clause, but I'm pretty sure it has a clause that says you have the right to peaceably assemble. You do not need government permission to exercise a right. If it is an unalienable right, you do not need to ask permission to exercise it. That's why gun permit laws are a violation of the Constitution, because I'm asking government permission to exercise the right to keep and bear arms, right? So if you have the right, and again, Jen, if you want, I can look it up later, and I'll see you later this week.
You bet.
The clause in the North Dakota Constitution, I'm because you know me, I'm picky, that says you have the right to peaceably assemble. That is all you need. Now, as a courtesy, if you have a large group of people going into a congested area, I would notify the local government as a courtesy, right? I'm not asking your permission. I'm informing you that I'm going to have 5,000 people in front of the Capitol. I'm going to have 1,000 people in front of the Capitol so that you can properly prepare. I'm not asking your permission. I have the right to peaceably assemble. I'm informing you. So that's that. Did that answer your question there, Jan?
It did. Thank you.
Excellent. What's the second question from Facebook?
Before I tell you, I want to know again if you give a location of the flyer.
So if you go to constitutionstudy.com, that's where all my stuff is. there's a search bar on the right-hand side. And if you search for knowing your rights, you'll see one that says knowing your rights placard, PLACARD. That's where you can get, it's a PDF that's up there. And there's also a downloadable version link, I think. If you have any problems, just go to the website. You can ask a question. You can contact me through the website and I'll point you. But again, just search for knowing your rights. Several articles will come up. One will say knowing your rights placard, and you can click on that.
The 17th Amendment.
Yes.
What are you talking about? How the states have the authority to send their senator to DC. Can they still do it as a state?
No. So the 17th Amendment specifically states that the Senate of the United States shall be composed of 2 senators from each state elected by the people thereof. So now the only way to send senators to the US Senate is by an election of the people. Now, were you talking about the recall?
No, I was
Okay.
thinking if the states had the rights, states' rights, why can't they say, you know what, this is what, if the people of, say like North Dakota said, no, this is what we want to do. We want to not follow the 17th Amendment. We want to do it this way.
They have to, again, they have voluntarily given up the right to make that decision. They have said, the state said, we're going to do it this way. If you want that changed, repeal the 17th Amendment. I would be so happy if they repealed the 17th Amendment.
Just like we were saying before, when the state says, you know, they want to see this, you know what, we're not going to do it, like final terminating the contract. Why can't they, the states, do it that also?
But again, you're breaking, the only way to do this, they are then in violation of the Constitution. They are breaking the law, right? Because the Constitution is supreme. So even if the state were to pass its own amendment to its own Constitution, the Supreme, the U.S. federal Constitution would supersede it because they specifically said by election of the people, right? If, like I said, if they'd only said by legislative appointment or electors, that they said that becomes supreme law. They then become, they would be, they either break the law, break the compact, and stop being a state of the a member of the union, I should say. They'd still be a state, they just wouldn't be a member of the union.
Or they would have to have at least 30 other states too.
Or they'd have to get the other states to repeal it, which would be, in our current political climate and our current educational climate, extremely difficult. Because most people would just look at them, what do you mean I can't democratically elect my senator? Well, understand, their job is not to represent you, it's to represent the state. So you have to educate people before you can get them to the point saying, oh, okay, that kind of makes sense. Maybe this is a bad deal.
Have you read about the executive order, or have you actually read the executive order that was announced by the governor of Tennessee, stating that people will be removed from their homes? They're deemed, I don't know the wording, deemed COVID risk to society and to their own family, take them out of away from their family forcefully and put into a segregated camp for folks who are unvaccinated. I read it myself. I'm going to
Send me a link because I haven't read that one. Most of the interesting, okay. Then I haven't read it because I've been on the road for 2 days.
Okay.
So yeah, please send me the link. I'm very interested because I live in Tennessee, and I've already had conversations with. Oh, thank you. I've already had conversations with. I've already informed the governor of his violation of his oath of office with previous. Now, what's interesting is most of what he did, except for some really early stuff, most of what he did, most of his executive orders were more, all right, the health department can suspend these regulations. Emergency powers in Tennessee limits what the governor can do. He's been pretty good I mean, he recently renewed his emergency declaration, and I read through it. And again, it's saying, yes, you know, we're allowing more healthcare workers, you know, healthcare workers from out of state can come. So that one is very interesting. That one would get my dander up. So I want to see the actual wording of it. You can contact me through the website, or I believe my email's here. Yes.
Send that to you because I think that's interesting, an executive order from the governor.
Yes, well, that would be, not only would that be, unless he could get a warrant for their removal. And again, the warrant would have to be based on probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation. And those, he'd have to get, you know,
What would this warrant be based on? The fact that they, yes, that they are unvaccinated, they determined that they're not at risk, that they have natural immunity, they've already had COVID. I mean, there's so many.
yes. All right, that's what I said. The details will matter because, them's fighting words.
Yeah.
And I will tell you that I know outside of Nashville, Memphis, and Knoxville, I don't think there are counties that would cotton to something like that.
I used to live in
Okay. So yeah, once you get outside of the cities, they're not cotton for that. You coming for grandma, you're going to be met by my friend AR and 15 in the holler. Yeah. You're going to be my friend Smith and Wesson. Thank you. Did you enjoy yourself? Good. Good. Zoom, we have any more questions before I tie this up? We're pretty much at our time, but being I'm not home. Is that it? Everyone's done?
Yeah, I don't have any questions.
Great. Well, listen, this has been an interesting experiment. I think if I do it again, I have to rewire some of my stuff because I didn't take into consideration quite all the audio difficulties I might run into. So we might try this again if the schedules work out. For those of you who may be in the North Dakota or Wyoming area, I hope to meet you. Again, whether you're on Facebook, whether you're on YouTube, whether you're on Zoom, I'm looking forward to meeting people. And again, we'll try this again in a couple of weeks. Then I should be back home, so it'll be a little more like our usual thing. Right? One more time. Friday, I'm in Killdeer. Saturday, I'm in Minokan Grove. Sunday, I'm in Tioga. Monday, I'm in Thermopolis, Wyoming. Tuesday, I'm in Douglas, Wyoming. And you can find more about it. Just go to constitutionstudy.com/tour, TOUR. All the information's there. Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.